Good morning, everyone. My name is Judyth Sachs. I'm the Chief Academic Officer of Studiosity, and it gives me great pleasure to be the person that facilitates these symposia for Studiosity. I want to acknowledge that I'm hosting this online conversation on the lands of the Gadigal people, and I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales and elsewhere in Australia. Today is our second symposium for 2024, and I believe we had 180 registrations, which is really very good. So thank you to those who've registered. Thank you to those who have actually turned up. I understand that work gets in the way of fun. The focus today is on student belonging, persistence, and success. And our panel today is Professor Michelle Lincoln, DVC academic from the University of Canberra, Lisa Bolton, the Director of QILT Research and Strategy at the Social Research Centre, Dr. Joey Crawford, Senior Lecturer in Management at the University of Tasmania, and Angela Kagucia, Postgraduate Student in Communications from the University of Canberra. So the focus for today is I've done the introduction. I'm now going to invite the members of the panel to introduce themselves, and then I will ask each member of the panel a question, and then we will start the conversation. Those of you that are in the audience, please put your questions in the Q&A, but also I understand that a lot of interesting conversation happens in the chat as well. But if you want me to be able to ask the question, you've got to put it in the in the Q&A part. So, Angela, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi all, my name is Angela Kagucia. I am in the third semester of my Master of Strategic Communication degree in the University of Canberra. I am also the postgraduate student representative to the academic board here at UC, and I am the treasurer in the Student Representative Council.
Thank you. Joey.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Honoured to be here and welcome to you all. I'm Joey Crawford. I'm a lecturer at the University of Tasmania. I can see a few UTAS people and other people that I'm familiar with, so welcome in. I have a background in measuring leadership and behaviour originally and thinking about how humans relate and connect with each other, which is part of my interest in the space of belonging, and particularly how students belong and how belonging supports them to persist and stay. I recently wrote on belonging for the University's Accord process, and I'm currently working in the space of how AI is affecting our engagement with belonging and how AI is causing us to belong in different ways, and how we build online spaces that might support people to belong.
Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. Michelle Lincoln, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic at the University of Canberra, and I'm on Ngunnawal land today. Pay my respects to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people with us today. I'm here because I guess I have an institution-wide view on belonging, and are part of the group who make decisions about where we invest and where we're trying to get the best outcome for our students as possible across the entire institution. So I guess I'm probably going to be commenting at a macro level on belonging in universities.
Michelle.
Lisa?
Oh, sorry, Lisa, sorry.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Bolton. I'm Director of QILT Research and Strategy at the Social Research Centre. I was about 30 years in the sector before I moved out to what I like to call my first real job in the real world, which was a bit of a shock. I'm probably here as the data nerd component of the conversation because we have questions in the QILT surveys around student sense of belonging and engagement. So that's me.
Thanks very much. So let's get on with the questions. And given that this is about students, I've already told Angela that she's going to be the first cab off the rank in terms of the questions. So Angela, I'm interested to know, how do students define belonging, success, and persistence? And do their experiences and expectations aligned with what the university offers. I think you're on mute.
There we go. Apologies. Thanks for that. I'd first start by defining belonging and how it affects a student's success and how you need persistence in that. So I'll speak based on my experience as an international student. I came to Canberra a year ago, and when I first got here, I had this sense of otherness. I'm new to this country and I have no idea what is happening around me. I have no idea what the education system is like. This is the first time I have been out of the country. And the sense of belonging is that you have connections within the community, that you are valued and you are supported. It involves the formation of meaningful connections with your peers, with your faculty and staff, and also feeling that you have been integrated into the university culture. With success, it talks about, typical, academic success, but also seeing personal growth through achievements and the acquisition of skills for future careers. With the persistence, it's the determination to continue and complete one's studies despite challenges. And to your question, the university, the student expectations on belonging, you expect the university to create these opportunities for you to form these connections that I'm speaking about. And UC does a good job of doing that. In most cases, there are a lot of support systems in place to ensure that as an international student, as a new student to UC, you're able to connect with your peers, you're able to connect with the university, the faculties, and there's so much support, academic support. So there's support within the faculty, there's support through the library, and there's support through student wellbeing. And all of these need a lot of persistence to keep going, to keep being able to try and achieve your goals as a student.
Thanks very much. And what would you want the university to do that they're not doing? And what would your colleagues say, and your peers in your class say? This is what the university needs to do. This is the perfect opportunity because you've got the Deputy Vice Chancellor academic listening.
To be honest, in the first semester, there's a lot of communication from the school, checking in on how you're doing, checking in on whether you've made use of the various support systems. But the first semester, it's more like the honeymoon phase. And it's so beautiful. The moment you start adjusting, you feel like you're getting into the groove of things. It's great. But after the first semester, things get really real, things get really tough. And because you also have to commit to things like work, there's a lot less time to check in with the school. And there's also less communication from the school about whether you're doing okay. And there's less encouragement to make use of the support systems. I think there needs to be a consistent attempt to ensure that students are meeting their personal goals, that they are succeeding, that they are not overwhelmed, that they're actually feeling integrated into the university culture. I'm in my third semester, and if you asked me last semester if I was feeling successful, I wasn't. I was not okay. The second semester was even more challenging, and I expect the third semester to be more challenging. And I know it only gets more difficult. And I'm doing my master's, and I have the privilege of being a bit more mature than some of my companions. And so I have some coping skills built into my system, into my schedule, but a lot of younger students don't have this. They don't have the luxury of experience. So I think also creating programs to support students throughout by, encouraging them, doing stuff like support programs, skills programs, things like that, just throughout the entirety of the student's experience. There's a lot of request for feedback in terms of how you're engaging with the units, and that's really good. That's great. We can do more, but specifically on the personal, the social, the emotional, all of those areas are very important to ensuring student success.
Thanks very much. Second question I'm going to ask to Joey. We've known some time of the importance of social integration and student retention and success. Why is it still an issue? And then I might also ask Lisa, who has access to the data. Why is it still an issue? So Joey, why don't you start and then Lisa?
Good question. Tough question. Firstly, I always think about social connection, right? And when I'm thinking about social connection, I often try to pose a slightly different question, right? Where are people connecting? And one of the challenges I think that we've been experiencing in this kind of new world order of universities the last 40 or 50 years is universities aren't like they once were, where a person dedicated their entire life to a university experience. Where you walk to university, I am a university student. People around me are university students. They're here to learn and only to learn. They probably have a degree of privilege attached to the resourcing required to go and be in and around universities and only universities. And so you have a social circle in your personal life, you have a social circle in your university, and that's all you need. Whereas now it's this huge myriad, and I always get a little bit scared when I ask students to name the places they come from, and the places they're locating themselves from. I'm a parent, I'm a friend of this person, I'm a carer, I work in this job and also in this job, I'm on the board of this thing, I volunteer for this group and space. And what it means is that when we come into universities, students come with such a diverse range of different spaces they're thinking about and identities they're attaching themselves to, which makes it hard to connect sometimes, because instead of going to a space where we all have a shared understanding of the world and we're all sharing the same values, it's very easy to connect with someone who's very similar to yourself. As we increase and try to become more diverse and equitable in university spaces, that automatically creates challenge for belonging, because diversity and belonging don't always go naturally hand in hand. Because the more diverse you are, the less easy it is for us to connect without training, without development, without support, despite the fact that both of those things are incredibly important to do in parallel.
Lisa?
As the resident data nerd, in the QILT survey and the student experience survey, there's a question whether the student feels a sense of belonging to their institution. And Joe's done an amazing paper looking at that, looking at I think the drivers of that particular item. But it's always been quite low, in the like 50% or thereabouts of students who have a level of positive response to that item. And that's been since the 1990s, where we used to ask graduates, and since the SES started in about 2011. We see that the things that say, if you take correlation as a sort of a vague notion of importance, it's things like induction and orientation activities and whether the teaching staff actively engaged the students. So it's a bit about that early forming of relationships with their peers, but also forming two-way relationships with the academic staff. And you see, people knowing your name and that sort of stuff. And that's particularly important for internal study mode students. So we see a difference in the engagement in those activities between students who are studying on campus and expect an on-campus kind of interactive experience compared to those who are studying online. And when COVID hit, we saw the sense of belonging scores drop in line with all the other measures, where students' expectations about what a university experience is weren't necessarily met. So there's that component of what's important to the students, but there's also, I think, a component of what we think is important for students in terms of their skills development and that kind of thing. So there's two skills items which sit in that highest relationship with the sense of belonging, one of which is working with other students as part of their study. So that team building kind of skill development, and spoken communication is the other. And so we see a lot of comments from students saying, I came to class, it was all online, other students never turned on the cameras, I don't know who any of these people are, the dreaded group work, I don't know anybody, I don't know who to get in a group with, I don't know these people. So I think there's underlying issues that are not just the scores that come out of the surveys.
In terms of what you said before, Joey, the relationship that students have with the university now is much more transactional. For many of them, they come to university, they do the courses, and then they go home because they've got to work, they've got family commitments. To what extent do we need to rethink how we support students, given the different relationship that students have with learning, the different demands on their times, and the different expectations they have about how they learn and when they learn? Joe, why don't you answer that, and then I'll throw it over to you, Michelle, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if students are different, right, we have to teach differently than we did 50 years ago. And I go back to the belonging hypothesis, which is a social psychology piece, is about as old as I am. It still holds reasonably true in the context that in order to build places where people want to be and stay, we have to support them to build high quality connections and relationships with a small number of people that are regular, frequent, and have a degree of affect or care between them, right? So in a university context, some people already have a lot of that. So you come into class and you've got a really supportive family that's overwhelming in terms of when you wake up, they're there, they're around, in the evening, they're there and they're supportive. And the weekends, you're going on road trips and whatever else, and your work friends are doing really great things with you. Some people have that. And they may not be actually looking for more friends and more social resources in a university context. Part of our job is potentially to question whether we need to help them build future contacts. So we need to kind of help them unlearn a little bit and relearn the idea that maybe they need a few good, strong networks in their new discipline space. And that might be something that we think about. But we also might say there are other students that need more support, and we might want to triage a little bit better and say, actually, these are the students coming to us potentially from underprivileged or underserved backgrounds that don't have strong social resources and capital that might need more support. In the online world, and we wrote about this in the COVID context, when we forced all the students to go online, you know, I wasn't studying, but I was lucky. I had my own office, I had my own space to work, so I could sit far enough away from someone else and just focus and do my own thing. Some people don't have that. Some people use university libraries as a space to get away from domestic violence, from really poor personal life contexts. So those online environments don't actually support students to go to a place that was once safe, their learning world. So universities probably do need to change their belief and their way of thinking about belonging. Some students need it in the university world. Some students might need it for their future careers. And some students might have a really strong resource set, and we might be throwing resources in an area that doesn't need it.
Michelle.
Yeah, I just want to go back to where Angela started, in that belonging means different things to different people. And she talked about feeling supported and valued at university, and feeling valid as a person, that you had a right to be there and that you belonged. And then there's the social connection part. And so what I take away from all of that is that this it's a multifaceted construct, and therefore you need multiple different ways of addressing that with different groups of students. And so universities need to take a very nuanced approach, I think, and to understand deeply their students and the cohorts of students that they might have at university, including the diverse backgrounds that they come from. And so what that says to me is, you know, lots and lots of different opportunities for students to connect and engage in ways that they want to. And so for some, you know, that might be through the traditional things we've seen before, like clubs and societies and sport, social sport, competitive sport, etc. But for others, it might be about access to a queer space, or a women's space, or a parents' room, or prayer rooms, culturally safe spaces for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. And so, you know, that's a very different strategy from playing sport, for example. And I think, you know, I think the online space is one that is challenging all of us, actually. And I think the starting place with that is understanding what actually do those students want and need from their university education. And then there's what do we deliver to meet that. But I can give you a really quick example of something that we've tried, a course that is offered online. What we did was we grouped students in their online tutorial groups geographically, so that we had a group from Northern Victoria, a group from Western New South Wales, etc. We grouped them geographically so that if they wanted to, there was a chance that they could get together face to face and have a coffee. And while they did a lot of work online, we actually found they did that. If the opportunity was there, they would catch up face to face with each other and form those different kinds of learner relationships. And so a simple thing like that, grouping students in tutorials based on online tutorials based on their geographic location, was one strategy that has worked quite well in terms of helping students feel a sense of connection and belonging.
So the next question, for some students, being first in family or community gives a sense of being a stranger, or even feeling they're not deserving of being at university. In large universities, these students often get lost. How can these students be identified, and what support can and should be offered? So I'm going to ask Joey again, and then I'm going to ask you, Angela, because UC is not a large university, but I think that students still get lost and can feel quite lonely. So the question is, being a stranger, feeling not deserving.
Yeah, good question. A lot of universities use some kind of diagnostic model when students come in the door, where they kind of say, actually, these students have particular markers of disadvantage. A few examples, right? Females are less are often on that list. People from people with disability, people that are coming from regional areas, etc. And the more markers of those, or the more intersectional components you have, the more support you might be likely to need. I like this model, and I also don't like this model. And the reason I don't like that model of detection based on a series of demographic characteristics is that some people come from, so I come from a very poor background. We were on the brink of, my mum declared bankruptcy when I went to university because I stopped working. So I moved away and I stopped working and started kind of taking Centrelink to go and do a bachelor degree. And so very low end of the financial privilege spectrum. But I'd had other areas that I was doing quite well. I had a strong social network. I was in a small town, so it was very hard to kind of not be picked up by someone on the way home from work and say, actually, yeah, I'll take you home because I know exactly where you live. So I had markers that meant that I was actually probably okay. Academically, I was doing fine. But on one of these predictive models, I would have come up as a red flag, and you need to deploy some resources to make sure this person stays. And so in this case, it might be more about us being better as first-year experience people and first-year teachers, and saying, actually looking at the front of your student load and going, okay, I've got 400 students coming in the door. All of them have been online. All of them are kind of working through their content. Here's 35 students who actually haven't been engaging or don't look like, they're quiet at the back of the class. What can I do to support them to actually start transitioning into university and out of their previous space? And it might be more targeted, actually kind of using a behaviour-based response rather than a demographic response as the kind of core.
Angela, I've been an international student. At least I was an international student in America, and I might as well have been an international student in Uganda, because the Americans kept on saying to me, oh, please, I just want to hear you talk. I love your accent, which immediately makes you feel dreadful. So that integration into, it looked familiar, but it was not familiar. What was it like for you coming to Australia and coming to Canberra? Canberra is, a very special place, particularly for its chilly winters.
I'm still adjusting to it, but typically in a lot of the rooms that I walk into, a lot of the time I'm the only person of color, and specifically from my part of the world in East Africa. And you notice it's very, very noticeable from the onset, and it can be quite uncomfortable. But I've taken up this mentality that I'm here, and there's a reason I'm here, and I'm here to occupy space. I'm here for my voice to be heard. And I think that's the only thing that's gotten me through. I also have to sometimes put on blinders and be intentional about not focusing on that, because at the end of it all, we are all people. Yes, we have different experiences. We all have different backgrounds, and we are all unique. And so we are all here for a purpose, and focusing on that purpose has helped me get over the otherness that I feel a lot of the time. Yeah.
Now, I've got a question here from Amy Martin. And Amy asked the question with regards to belonging, the belonging conversation, and what universities could do differently. What messaging is supplied to all students versus identified students? For example, international students, but I would also put Indigenous students and refugee students there as well. Could we do better in encouraging all students to be involved in belonging support? And I don't care who wants to start answering that question.
If I may, as a recipient of such communication, I noticed that there was a lot of communication from the International Student Support Center, and there was a lot of messaging about what I could do to what I could do, what support systems I could join when I got on campus, that weren't necessarily available to, or not closed off, but they were specifically for international students. And while that's good, it doesn't help with that otherness, where you're not really accustomed to being with people from a different culture from you. International students typically come from cultures, especially from African and Asian cultures, are very, very similar. So there's a similarity to our experiences. And so being put together in these support groups, while it helps us form connections with each other, it doesn't necessarily help us integrate into the university culture. It took a while to also understand the accent, because that's a whole other thing. You're learning with people who have a completely different accent. You're learning in a different education system. So it took a lot of doing. And I think if some of these programs involved us engaging with students from Australian backgrounds, I think that would have helped us adjust a bit better, because it takes at the very least a semester for an international student to adjust to the accents, only the accents in the new system. So I think that's one of the things that can help.
Okay.
What we saw in the QILT data over COVID was that international students were the hardest hit, both socially. There was questions about what was happening to them external to their studies that was impacting their studies. So, you know, difficulty with where they were living, difficulty with their financials, but also they were more dependent on the support networks at their institutions than the domestic students who could source that elsewhere. And so they were harder hit. And in 2021, a lot of them were located offshore. So they were actually trying to study fully online. And when you saw the comments in there, they were really looking for a more international experience and looking for that engagement, particularly with Australian students. And you see in the comments, and it's worth looking at the comments, that those students are talking about not only being exposed to their own cultural groups or their own small group and not integrating enough with the Australian students. And to some degree, that otherness is exacerbated by high stakes group work, for example, where the Australian students feel that they're somehow disadvantaged through that process, rather than setting up activities which get both groups to recognise the value in the other. That, for example, international students would have a really good understanding of international business practices in their own countries, and wouldn't it be great for Australian students to interview them about that, and vice versa. So activities where those groups are put together and they see the value in the other and engage with them on that basis, I think are really interesting activities institutions could undertake to try to get that more international experience for both international students and domestic.
So what I'm hearing you saying is there should also be a pedagogy of inclusion.
Yes.
That inclusion is really quite fundamental to learning about the other, and in learning about the other, trying to understand the challenges they're facing.
Yes,
is that happening in any of the institutions that we've got around in front of us this morning?
I think it happens a lot in single units and subjects across university. So in my space, the evidence that we picked up from the QILT analysis we did was that teamwork skills was really important to contributing to belonging in our top 10, but access to group work was not an important factor. It was related, but not an important factor. And that's what Lisa was saying there resonates quite a lot with some of that evidence, that getting access to learning how to be in a team and learning the skills of, because teamwork skills are communication, they're about accepting the person on the other side of the communication dialogue, and being able to relate to someone else. Those skills were much more important to supporting people to build connections than forcing students to go and write a 3,000-word report where they chunk it out and they kind of write half a page each, and you can see very clearly which student has written in which spots. In my context, my teaching, so I get the privilege, I think, in my space, I teach leadership development and behaviour. So I get the opportunity to kind of focus a lot more on the relational components of student learning. If you're learning about, I don't know, first year biology, maybe that's a bit harder. But in my case, I put students into groups in their first week, and it's a random configuration, and each week they're meant to meet outside of class at least once. So they can do it however they want, Zoom, face-to-face, whatever else. I do try to ping them on postcodes, so I kind of group them up in spaces that are similar, just like Michelle was saying earlier, and get them to meet and go through an activity. The activity is not weighted. There's no assessment. It's a hurdle, so it's required for them to complete it. And then at the end, their job is to kind of, they're meant to be influencing their group. So they're meant to be practicing processes of leading and influencing. And there's a cumulative portfolio piece they're working on as they're getting through. And then there's kind of a high stakes individual assessment at the end based on all of the times they've had to go and meet with each other for an hour. The first semester that I did this, we found, like, when I asked students how long they were meeting, some of them were meeting for half a day, and they were doing the activity for about an hour, and then they were sitting around a room together talking about their assessments and talking about their activities, and it worked really well because I can't be there all the time. And the power imbalance that I have as an academic that marks their assignments and stands at the front of the room behind a whiteboard tells them that I can't be their friend. But I can facilitate and support them to build friends at a more power balanced level, so peer relationships.
Michelle, do you have anything to offer?
I was going to add actually a fairly recent observation is we're all aware that students are working a lot because of cost of living pressures. And what we've been seeing outside of the classroom, I actually agree with Joey that this is something that is probably best facilitated within units and teaching context. But external to that, because international students have limits on the amount that they can work, they're actually the ones that are tending to engage more in the university activities that are meant to facilitate belonging and social connection for all students. International students are doing that far more than our domestic students, because our domestic students are not on campus, they're working. And so there's sort of almost a turnaround there in terms of who's engaging with what in the university. Our most popular sport on campus is badminton. And it's played by international students largely. And so it's just an interesting turn of events, I think, and it's another challenge, isn't it, around getting that integration between domestic and international students.
There have been a number of questions, both in the Q&A, but also people put in questions before the symposium today on online learning. And certainly during COVID, online learning was the pedagogy du jour. So what can online providers do to promote a sense of belonging to their student cohorts? And I'd like all members of the panel to provide some sort of perspective. So why don't we start with our student first? So Angela, what about you?
I think some of the techniques that the other panel members have spoken about would be really helpful. I think some of the things that we do in UC, like doing the discussion forums, I think those help students engage a little more in discussion. I think that's more on the academic side. I think for them to have that sense of belonging, there needs to be a lot more thinking about what can do this. I think this needs a bit more research. I think this conversation is a great start, but we won't necessarily be able to answer this question in this panel, in what I'm feeling, because there's a lot we need to look into specifically what can be done for online students, because it's not the same experience that you have on campus. You can't involve online students in orientation activities the same way that you would with on-campus students. You can't involve online students in the same capacity that you would with the career fairs. So it's an area of research, an area of growth.
Thank you.
I'll agree with Angela. And I would add that I think we do need to do the work around understanding what that means, given that we know that it's so important for success and progression. We've got to grapple with, if it's not the traditional way of belonging that we've thought of in the past, what is it for this group of students? And I suspect it's things not like, say, friendship and having friends and knowing people. It's about professional networking. It's about meeting people who can help you in your career goals as a student who's online. And I think sometimes what I see with students in this space is the connection to the academic, to the lecturer, to the teacher is actually prioritised over connection to other students. And I think that takes careful management. And I think the ability to be taught by guest lecturers, experts in the field, potential employers that facilitate that professional networking is potentially part of what these students want. But again, it's something, as Angela said, that we need to do more research and test.
Joey?
Yeah, I agree. I suppose is the easy answer. I think the first comment I'd make is that we can't treat online students the same as we treat on-campus students. The way that we engage with them is very different. The way that, even cool breakout rooms and nice simulated environments are still very different than having a table in the corner you can walk over to and say, hey, how you going? Or you can drop in and kind of you can feel the space you're in, all the people learning, which is slightly lost when you're sitting in bed with your pajamas on, with headphones and a laptop. And the kind of students that we're seeing online are also different. So the people coming on campus often do have a little bit more time available. They have a bit more resources to be able to come to class and come and spend dedicated time learning. People online might be trying to convenience learn slightly and work their way through, how do I learn given I have to work 60 hours and whatever else, and try to squeeze in some learning in that mix. But the big observation, or the big comment I make, is that if the biggest predictors of belonging are human connection. So if I support you to interact with other students, I build a place where you might be able to belong. And in that model, we actually want to say, how do I find a relationship, the first kind of meaningful student-to-student relationship for every single student in my delivery? And when you start simulating the front component of your units and your subjects, and I see Sally's in the chat talking about a transition pedagogy for the first year as well, to make sure students have their first friend or their first meaningful connection with another student. Because I agree with Michelle, we need to have students being able to build networks with industry. But if you've got a year 12 student that's coming into university for the first time and you put them beside a CEO, they're going to quiver and run away, or make some really small talk and then run away, and the connection's lost. And so we can support them to build low stakes connections with training, getting them ready so they can kind of unlearn their high school life and start to become a student in a university context, and then eventually help them transition into being a professional, a nurse, a doctor, a teacher, a CEO, a business manager in my context. And that requires kind of their first meaningful connection.
I agree with Joey, and there's the issue around skills development, which often is implicit in a lot of higher education studies still. And so those skills of working with other people, the skills of spoken communication, how do we develop those skills in an effectively online environment? Because a lot of students are doing at least partly hybrid now. The institutions haven't necessarily come back to fully on-campus delivery. So how much hybrid means that you're missing out on these developmental tasks and activities to develop your ability to work effectively in a team and communicate effectively, but in a fully online environment. A lot of work now is hybrid. So I only go to the office 1 or 2 days a week. And most of my engagement with my colleagues is in Teams meetings. We jump on, sometimes we just jump on for a chat to have a general grumble about something from work. Fabulous, because we know each other. So how do you foster those relationships and those abilities around communication and working in teams for students who will find themselves in a more hybrid environment when they, hit their forever job or their career? So it's I agree with all of this, and it's important in the teaching and learning space that we understand how we make this work in a hybrid or online environment.
Another area associated with online learning is AI. And of course, AI is very much the topic of the moment, both in its pros and the cons. And I'm just going to throw this one out there. Do you think AI can support student belonging? And what will students' perceptions be of AI support? And this was a question that came in beforehand.
I can probably have a go first. We've just published some work kind of testing this relationship a little bit and trying to think about what happens when people are connecting using AI. It always worries me a bit, right? And the reason why I think that AI has a potentially an inverse relationship with belonging long term, but not short term, is that as the way if we assume that belonging is built primarily on connections in place, so when we have human connections and meaningful connections, we feel like we belong, and we belong to universities when we have a series of meaningful connections on campus or in an online space. If students, particularly disadvantaged students, require the most social skill training to get them up to a point where they can build meaningful connections, a lot of places where we build social connection are things like library support, going into a student advisor to seek help, sitting down with a peer and saying, I don't know why I've been marked down for a comma in this spot in my references, and trying to work through those things. Whereas AI can do all of that, right? All of those basic skill tasks that we once had to do, AI can now do for us and make a lot of our life easier, which I love, but I also know how to do it. And I've also built the social skills attached to all of those things beforehand. So if we're replacing incidental social interaction, we're reducing the time that students have to learn how to connect with others. We saw this a lot in COVID, where students couldn't go into campus and ask a librarian, hey, I don't know why the teacher's saying my APA 7 headings are wrong, or I don't know how to write this paragraph. Yes, they're learning the writing skills, but they're also practicing implicitly making connections and building social skills, which a lot of our learning is done socially. And so in the AI context, I think AI is having a negative effect on our social skills, and that's likely to then lead into difficulty connecting, higher rates of social anxiety, for example, and eventually into a context where we don't belong as frequently.
So you're making the distinction between the social interaction versus the cognitive development of learning.
Yeah, that's right. So I think distinction, yes, like as in, I think I like to pull them out and kind of make both of them explicit, but they are interwoven, right? So we're building connections, we're learning. So AI can help us with the cognitive component. AI can potentially mislead us a little bit in this social.
Mm-hmm. Any other members of the panel want to make an observation or a comment?
I agree with Joey. I think the use of AI in the belonging space would work to isolating students more instead of working towards helping them develop that sense of belonging. Because no matter how much we create these great technologies, these great AIs to help students, nothing can replace that social aspect of being a student. I think it would isolate students more if they became more dependent on AI tools to resolve some of the issues that they're encountering, and that would exacerbate the issue of not belonging.
There's a question here from Jamie Chapman, and Jamie says, and Jamie's also made a comment about the AI point, but I think Jamie's question is an interesting one. Is self-care, are self-care skills actively encouraged in our support systems? And that's links to the issues of mental health and mental well-being that somebody brought up a little bit earlier on the chat. So it is about educating the whole person, being aware not only of their learning, but also their well-being, their support. And so what does the puzzle look like? And what do we in universities need to do to make sure to continue my metaphor, to make sure that each of the pieces fit and support students? At the end of the day, it's actually supporting students. That's our core business. Support students to learn.
I'm happy to start. I mean, there are some curriculums that will directly address that, and often they're in the health professions, where we know that health professionals need to care for themselves while they're caring for others. But at a university level, interestingly, we have a distinction between student wellbeing and a medical and counselling service. And that distinction is important. Wellbeing is about keeping yourself well. And within that, there's almost levels of care and steps that students can take, from general advice, workshops around managing stress, etc., right down to run a specific coaching program for success for students, which is a brief, multiple appointments, 3 or 4 one-on-one coaching with someone who actually helps students set goals, decide how they're going to approach their semester, what they need to do to keep themselves well, but also to keep themselves on track and progressing. And that's a fairly intense and high-level intervention, but we're finding that for some of our students, it makes all the difference. And so, there's a whole range of different things there, depending on what students come to us with. We need to meet the students where they're at in terms of their own journey around learning how to care for themselves. But I think it's absolutely the remit of universities, because our role is to put people in a position where they will learn and where they can learn well and succeed. And so I see it as part of our role, and with varying levels of, I guess, intervention, to use a health term in that space.
Mm. In the QILT surveys, we've got a question which is, I've seriously considered leaving in the last 12 months. Remembering this is already August, the people who are going to leave transition probably already have. And this is your more engaged cohort who bothered to do a big survey. But the things that came out of that prior to the new items that are under it were health and stress was the big ticket one. Half the students who said they'd considered leaving cited health or stress. And in the newest survey, we've broken that out. So it's now mental health, physical health, stress. It's 3 separate things, but they're still all up the top. And financial difficulties is quite important. We had an optional set of items which uses the Personal Wellbeing Index and asks students about their level of stress and how well they're coping with that level of stress. And that was an optional piece that was developed by the sector with us, and they can just buy in. It's a fee-for-service one, but each institution will get the data about the Personal Wellbeing Index and those stress levels and how well they're coping. We also ask an extra question about whether they identify as LGBTQI+, and also a more detailed gender question, because the taxi one, it's maybe not great. And so what we see in the Wellbeing Index, LGBTQI identifying students who identify as non-binary or other, and students with disabilities all have lower scores against the other in terms of their Wellbeing Index, and also in terms of how much stress they're feeling and being less able to deal directly with that stress. And so the sector have the power here that if there are particular things that you need to know that you want to investigate, I encourage institutions that have bought into that module to dig in there, give it to the right people it's really fascinating. But also there's always the opportunity to start sort of customising the QILT surveys to get what you need out of it to be able to do this well.
I think one of the avenues that universities can utilize to teach students self-care skills. I've noticed that, especially here with UC, there are a lot of activities planned through the university's accommodation partner, which is Unilodge. There are a lot of activities like meditation, yoga, things like pottery, painting, a lot of planting of trees. And in those settings, people are able to have conversations about self-care. There are workshops on financial wellness. There are workshops on, taking care of your health and well-being. So I think that can also work towards both self-care and enhancing the sense of belonging amongst students.
I'm reflecting back on my experience of working in universities, in large research-intensive universities. And it certainly was the view, and it was my experience, that if students got past the first 6 weeks, they were very likely to complete the semester. If they felt a sense of isolation, loneliness, and working in an alien environment, many of them tended to drop out. So what's happening now in that first 6 weeks, which really is the basis where you either keep them or lose them? And Michelle, I'll ask you, because you've got the pan-university approach, and you've also worked in a large research-intensive university at Sydney.
Yeah, I haven't seen a huge amount of change, I have to say, in the way that we approach it. We tend to be continuing to do the traditional things that you would see in an orientation week, although I certainly encourage for that to really continue. That's not 1 week and done, that we continue to run those activities where students have opportunities to engage right over the first semester, actually. And because students now start in second semester, it's kind of a year-round thing. Although I was interested in Angela's comment about feeling like that level of communication dropped off in second semester, so that's really helpful feedback. Yeah, so I'd have to say I haven't seen a huge amount of change there. I think that there's probably more scaffolding and assistance within the curriculum going on, though. I think the focus has gone from being outside of the curriculum, the extracurricular stuff, into the curriculum, and how we really support students through that. So early assessment, for example, before census date is now pretty much, I think, in everybody's curriculum. And that's a good thing for students in terms of having to engage, test themselves, and get some feedback on how they're going. And I think that will also help students make good decisions around staying in units of courses. So, yeah, I think the biggest change has probably been within the curriculum as opposed to outside of it.
Probably one thing to comment, and I agree with Amy in the chat that's talking about the first assessment rather than the first 6 weeks being like that big hurdle for a student. It's the thing that validates or conflicts with their identity, that I'm a university student. You fail an assessment first round. For us as educators, we say, oh, that's fine. You're welcome to fail as many times as you need to learn. That's fine. Learning is meant to be uncomfortable. Learning is likely to induce periods of anxiety. If you look at Ron Barnett's work, he says good learning has to include degrees of uncertainty and anxiety, because you're unlearning old things and learning new things. But for me, I think it's how you triage your responses in that first assessment. So let's say a third of your students fail. Great. Before you send out the feedback to all the students and you press the automatic publish marker, maybe it's worth a quick phone call or an email to a student saying, hey, actually, you're going to fail the assessment that's coming out later today. But that's fine. So for me, for example, I have a resubmit policy on the first assessments that allows a student to resubmit and get a pass grade if they meet the criteria. They can't get beyond a pass because they're getting an advantage over the other students. But what it essentially does is allows them to move through that. And the first assessment's always very low stakes, because in the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks, students might I'm studying a unit at the moment, and I've just joined it, so it's week 3 in UTAS. So I'm about to rock up to a class this afternoon, having not prepared at all, and having to catch up with that experience. And lots of people are jumping in and out. So if we make our first assessments super low stake, give us a chance to kind of work out how students are going and where they're at, and then respond before you respond kind of saying, actually, you failed, kind of work out how you deal with that, because that immediate thing that says you have failed, it's 44%, or whatever that number is that validates a student's fears. I'm not a university student. I'm not a successful learner. I had difficulty I was only the middle of the range in high school, so why would I be a university learner? And try to work out how you respond to that identity challenge early so they can persist.
The other thing being the plethora now of academic calendars. So you have I consider it the VU model, but I think it's broader now, where students are coming in every, say, 6-8 weeks and starting. So that idea of transition is a very different animal, where a student might be away for 2 weeks and they've actually missed a third of a whole unit. And so those different academic calendars, I think, might need different approaches, particularly in my old world where I'm still teaching, where you had groups which had dropped down in size so that they were amalgamated. The level of disruption to those students and the networks that they'd already created is actually quite profound. And the level of dissatisfaction amongst those students was frightening to behold. And so those different academic calendars and the way we integrate students into a group, say, that already exists, for example, as Joey's experienced, I think is more important now. The old 2-semester, virtually everyone starts at the beginning, I think it might be gone, and we need to consider how those different academic calendars, as well as the different delivery modes, might be impacting on those abilities.
Sort of unpacking that a little bit, Sharon Altina asked the question, how do we normalise help seeking? So to actually ask for help requires a sense of self-knowledge, but also confidence, and feel that you're not being shamed. So how do we normalise that it's okay not to know and it's okay to ask for help? And let me ask the psychologist. I'm a sociologist by training, so I can ask a psychologist. That's you, Joey.
Yeah, organizational behavior person, really, but I'll take psychologist and probably get told off by the rest of the psychologists in the room. I think that's difficult, right? That's a really difficult thing to do. You're trying to teach someone actually it's fine to fail, it's fine to seek out help, and that's what the fear of seeking help comes from, right? If you seek out help, it's me accepting the idea that I've failed, or I'm not good enough, or I'm whatever in that mix, and I think that's difficult. I embed points of failure in the first handful of weeks. I call them points of failure as a way to say, actually, everyone does it. If you look at the Stanford, I think it's the collaboration project, I'm misquoting, I think, that they had a real challenge supporting Black Americans to stay in their courses. And so what they started doing was they designed a program that took videos of a really diverse range of students who'd persisted through to the end year, and they made an assessment in the final year of their bachelor degrees that required you record a video, a letter, a blog, whatever that thing was, to build a huge range of artifacts to show students they'd persisted. So despite what you look like or the kind of challenges that they'd faced, that they actually had persisted, and it normalizes. And the assessment is like, how do you struggle? When did you want to drop out? And all the students said, actually, I want to drop out 8 times in first year, and I want to drop out 12 times in whatever else. I remember almost dropping out of my PhD at one point, right before submission. Not quite sure why. I had the thesis already done, right? There was no logical reason for it, but I felt incredible desire to drop out and run away, because you can't fail your thesis exam or your thesis submission if you don't submit it. And so part of that is probably us rethinking, how we support students to accept that failure is pretty cool. Failure is fine. Failure evidence is that you're on the track to learning, but that actually it's a very normal experience.
And a lot of the research now around belonging talks about perseverance. And so you're a great case study of that perseverance. So what advice would you give to students who are just on that sort of liminal state, will I stay or will I go? Sounds like a rock song, doesn't it?
I think the best thing I encourage students to do is sense check. So sense check with someone who's done it or been through it, as much as you don't want to have people perpetuate bad case studies. the thing that kept me persisting was one of my supervisors calling me and going, hey, like, it's a fine thesis. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, I've done this 20 times before. You're my 21st candidate. And there's no reason to believe that this isn't going to work. And it was that minor comment, like, all right, well, on the benchmark, he said that actually it's fine compared to the other ones. And it was no longer my thesis was this alien thing that was horrific. And in my university, it was very uncommon to do publications, for example, in your thesis at that point. So I'd kind of said, oh, I should be more contemporary. And I did that. But that didn't, and that was fine. But I was worried that it was going to be not poorly received because all the papers were published rather than being somewhere else. But sense checking, going out and saying to another student, hey, like, I've actually done this poorly. And then they say, actually, if I did the same thing and I passed or whatever, is a way to challenge softly that assumption that you're going to fail by providing evidence to the counter.
Thank you for that. And Evelyn has reminded me that it's now 12 o'clock. In fact, it's 12:01. So look, thank you for members of the panel for contributing to our conversation. I think it's been robust and it's been very interesting. And I thank the 103 people that started off and the 91 that stayed until the end. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. And remember, we're here to support students. So thanks again and goodbye.